There's been a bit of a disturbing new trend on YouTube where aviation YouTube channels are picking up on the theme of reality TV shows and trying to rescue old airplanes using an unrealistic budget and certainly an unrealistic time frame, and now it's led to disaster. It's Tuesday, the 6th of February. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the Blanco Lirio channel, and an entire community mourns the loss of a pillar of their community, Sam Ganow, 65 years old, from the Rebuild Rescue Channel and the president of the local school board, in the wreck of this Grumman Cougar aircraft that occurred on the 1st of February. Let's check it out. Starting with the Aviation Safety Network, Thursday, 1 February, Grumman Cougar GA7. A lot more on this particular airplane momentarily. November 887 Charlie Charlie, a 1978 model Cougar, 1 fatality, 1 occupant, Coatesville, Pennsylvania. The Grumman GA7 Cougar, November 887 Charlie Charlie, impacted terrain shortly after takeoff from runway 29 at Coatesville, Chester County Airport. The pilot was killed. ADS-B data shows November 887 Charlie Charlie making a descending right-hand turn shortly after takeoff from runway 29. The aircraft has been hangared at the Marshall Brooks Field in Michigan following a prop strike incident. That was a double prop strike incident, and was put up for sale. After purchase, the rebuilding work was documented on the Rebuild Rescue YouTube channel. ADS-B data shows that it was first test flown after repairs on December 15th, 2023. It was subsequently ferried to CTH that same day. The accident was the first flight out of CTH after its arrival. Looking at the preliminary ADS-B data from ADS-B Exchange, let's see, 1824Z, the aircraft departs and pretty quick, gets a 1,000 foot per minute rate of climb, accelerates to a speed of 89 knots at 800 feet, still climbing at 896 feet per minute on 2 good engines, 768 feet per minute. The ground speed slows to 77 knots, and now right after he leaves the end of the runway, the vertical rate of speed goes to a negative 64 feet per minute, 76 knots, 72 knots, and 192 feet per minute, 70 knots, 64 feet per minute, 67 knots, 64 feet per minute positive rate of climb, 69 knots, 448 foot per minute rate of descent, 69 knots, 128 foot per minute rate of descent, 70 knots, 64 foot per minute rate of descent. He's holding that altitude of about 950 to 975 feet, so he's hanging on to his altitude, but he's just and barely hanging on to his energy state. 70 knots, 0 feet per minute, just barely holding level flight. Now he's got a little rate of climb, 192 feet per minute at 68 knots, 64 knots, 64 feet per minute rate of climb. Now he's losing that energy. He's down to 62 knots at that same 64 foot per minute rate of climb, and then a turn to the right and a loss of control of the aircraft, with a ground speed of 66 knots and a rate of descent of 700 feet per minute to the right. Looking at the wreckage from this photo here, the left wing is separated. The tail is scorpioned up and a little bit to the right. And with that left wing separated, that may very well have been an impact to the left, though initial reports, eyewitness reports, were indicating that the right engine was having troubles. But looking at these two propellers from this picture, it looks to me like neither propeller was feathered. This aircraft will not fly on one engine on a windmilling propeller. The propeller needs to be feathered. Also, investigators will be looking at the condition of the landing gear. Was the gear up or down? It's presumed that the landing gear was up, but can't tell from this picture. Also, too, we see that the prop on the left engine is curved back. Usually that indicates a lack of power on that engine. And the propeller on the right That blade appears to be straight, and I don't know where the other blade is. But also looking at the crumpling on the right wing, I can't see what's going on with the crumpling of the left wing here. It's hard to tell. Was this in a right-hand spin, a left-hand spin? But clearly this was a stall spin accident, virtually straight in. The direction of the spin at this point is irrelevant to the argument. The Grumman Cougar is an interesting light twin design that came out in the late 70s, a little too late to the party for the last of the general aviation big buildup of light aircraft and especially light twin-engine aircraft. It was quickly eclipsed by Piper and Beechcraft and Cessna light twin design. So as a result, only a handful of these aircraft were ever built. Built by the Grumman Aircraft Company, the same people that built the Tiger line of aircraft. It was a bonded, epoxy bonded aluminum construction, which gave a really smooth wing with no rivets. That's a good, solid design. But this particular design of the aircraft, they elected to go with only 160 horsepower Lycoming engines. So a very, dare I say, underpowered light twin design. And if we look at the numbers here in the pilot operating handbook for this aircraft, you'll see that the single engine rate of climb at sea level at gross weight is a mere 200 feet per minute. Remember, the definition of safe single engine service ceiling is a rate of climb of just 50 feet per minute. So that gave this aircraft a service ceiling, according to the book, of 4,250 feet. That's a very low altitude for a single engine service ceiling. For example, where I live here at 3,000 feet, this aircraft would be virtually useless to me as a twin engine aircraft. I could only operate it as a single engine aircraft because quite frequently the density altitude here at 3,000 feet is well above 4,000 feet density altitude. So if I had an engine failure on takeoff in this aircraft, my only choice would be to close the throttle on the good engine and treat it like a single engine aircraft and go ahead and crash straight ahead. Another situation with this choice of engines, the 160 horsepower engines, is the stall speed versus VMCA. The stall speed on this aircraft is books out at 71 knots, flaps up. The VMCA, or minimum control speed in the air, or at a specific configuration, is 61 knots. So VMCA is well below stall speed. Now I'm going to keep beating this dead horse because it's obvious that people are not getting the message here. What is the problem if your stall speed is less than VMCA? This is the region in the Beechcraft Air Pilot Operating Handbook that you are not to be operating in for VMCA demonstrations. What is the ingredients of a spin? Stall and yaw. What's a stall? Exceeding the critical angle of attack. So if you're exceed the critical angle of attack on one engine in this aircraft, what are the two ingredients to that spin? Stall and yaw. So if you slow this Grumman Cougar down to its stall speed on one engine, you will spin the aircraft. What's the problem with spinning a twin? Well, first, it's a prohibited maneuver. You are not supposed to spin a twin on purpose, ever. And if you ever get into a spin, your chances of recovering for a spin are very slim. Why? Because the angular momentum of having all that mass outside the center of rotation of the aircraft. Two engines plus fuel tanks means that you are not going to have enough rudder authority to recover from a spin in a light twin, as we discussed here with Scott Perdue on his BS Works 5 flat spins and twins. And just like the book says here in the Barron Manual, if you're in a condition where you're going to reach stall speed before you reach VMCA, no such demonstration, that's VMCA demo, should be attempted when the altitude and temperature are such that engine out min control speed is known or discovered to be close to the stalling speed. Loss of directional control or lateral control, just as stall occurs, is potentially hazardous. And another point, as brought out by an old-time MEI multi-engine instructor, the wild card is in the students in these VMCA demos. Now, we'll get to the engine failure on takeoff here in a moment. But on VMCA demos, once the demo is concluded, the student needs to carefully get the aircraft back into flying condition by reducing power on the good engine, lowering the nose, and then easing the rudder out. What we think may be happening in a lot of these VMCA demo crashes, which is not the case in this particular accident, what we think may be happening is the student pulls back on the throttle a little bit, but up at altitude, you hardly reduce the manifold pressure at all if you just pull the throttle back a little bit, and then lets off of the rudder too soon. Wham! Off to the rodeo you go. You got to come off that rudder easy. You got to gently get the airspeed back up. Now back to the crash at hand. The most important number for Sam, as soon as he started having engine troubles, is the blue radial, 85 knots, the best rate of climb speed on one engine. Any indicated airspeed less than 85 knots, the aircraft is going to descend. Any airspeed more than 85 knots, the aircraft is not going to climb. Why? Because anything less than 85 knots just creates too much induced drag on the aircraft and you're going to continue to lose energy. Why will it not climb above 85 knots? Because you simply don't have enough power on the anemic 160 horse Lycoming engine to climb out on one engine at speeds greater than 85 knots. Again, your best rate of climb might be 200 feet per minute, which it looks like he was obtaining, and that's probably because the other engine was making partial power, one of the most dangerous situations you can be in. So look at the engine failure after takeoff, 75 knots indicated airspeed or above. If you're less than 75 knots, you're better off just closing the throttle and landing on whatever is ahead of you. After 75 knots, depending on so many variables, just like the same variables of everybody trying to do the impossible turn back to the runway, that decision's got to be based on your loading, your density, altitude, and your competence. Anyways, if the decision is made to continue, just like any other twin-engine aircraft, maintain control and airspeed, make sure the landing gear is retracted, mixtures as required for altitude, props full forward, throttles full forward, identify, verify, feather, and secure 85 knots. And if the propeller on the bad engine is not feathered and is only left to windmilling, you're not going to climb. As a demonstration just how anemic the performance is on the Grumman Cougar, the guys from Rebuild Rescue immediately loaded this Grumman Cougar. This is not the Cougar they crashed. This is 769 Gulf Alpha. They were going on a flight to the Cougar that they were rebuilding in this Cougar, and they've stopped here at Puxatawny Airport, Pennsylvania, to pick up some gas. So they've got 4 people and full fuel. This is a 3,000-foot long airstrip at the 1,400-foot elevation in wintertime. Note this angle of attack. Gear up. And that's Sam doing the flying.
All right, so we got a little bit short of a runway here, but yeah, she's gonna be flying here soon.
Did they do all the calculations?
Fly's done. Oven buzzer's going off.
Oh, I thought you said it flies down.
Oh.
No, that's the stall warning. See, Sam doesn't find that too funny. That's the stall warning going off in the aircraft. Remember, you can stall an aircraft at any indicated airspeed, but only one critical angle of attack. So as they were attempting to clear those trees on 2 good engines with 4 guys and fuel in the Grumman Cougar, they were approaching stall speed. So what NTSB investigators have to figure out is why did this engine fail in the first place? And since there was no post-crash fire and the engines are relatively intact, they will be able to figure this out. But this NTSB investigator says that his people back in Washington, D.C. are reviewing the well-documented video series on Rebuild Rescue of the rescue of this particular aircraft. For those of you that are thinking you want to use YouTube to help supplement your aviation income, you might want to think again. Let me give you a little bit of YouTube math. On the Rebuild Rescue channel, they did 6 videos on the Grumman Cougar, which garnered a total of about 650,000 views. YouTube is currently paying about $5,000 per 1 million views. So 650,000 views would get you about $3,500 worth of ad revenue for that entire body of work. It's going to take a lot more than that to get this aircraft going again. So Jason also supplements his ad revenue with sponsors to his channel. If we go back and look at the history of Jason's channel, he starts out with RVs and cars and trucks from his automotive background, but it's this channel right here, Will It Start, which puts this channel on the map. 10 million views 2 years ago. Now that's nearly $50,000 worth of ad revenue to the creator. So that is a heady amount of cash to consider getting your YouTube career rolling. So what Jason apparently does is he starts a GoFundMe page to save the Cessna 401, and he's raised an impressive $248,000 to save the Cessna 401. And there's been some controversy over the 2 years so far of saving the 401 because Jason, like so many of us, gets sidetracked with other interesting projects, and people wonder, well, wait a minute, I thought I put my money into saving the 401, and now we're saving all these other aircraft as a result. But Jason says he needs to try and earn money off of saving these other airplanes so he can plow that money back into this 401 project. It's going to cost a lot more money than you can possibly imagine to save this Cessna 401. And the biggest inspiration to get this 401 project going was Sam Ganow himself, the victim of the crash in the Cougar. Sam was the former owner of this 401 and said to Jason that made him a bet, basically, that if you can get these engines started, I will give you the airplane. So on this Cougar project, Jason gave himself a rather unrealistic goal of getting this project done in just 5 days because the aircraft is not located at his home airport, and it's costing him about $1,300 a day to have the crew out there helping him working on the aircraft, and a budget of just around $59,000. He's hoping to turn a profit of about $20,000 on this aircraft. So Sam finds this Grumman Cougar on eBay. I think he picks it up for about $30,000, and the reason it's for sale and it's been sitting in this hangar for over 2 years is it suffered a double propeller strike when the aircraft left the taxiway at slow speeds and plowed into some runway or taxiway lights, and I believe the propeller on the other engine, the left engine, tagged the actual concrete, getting back onto the concrete off the grass. The reason this aircraft never sold is most people would realize that really the best thing to do for this airplane is to completely overhaul the two engines, split the case and magnaflux and inspect everything and completely overhaul both engines. But Jason does the minimum required by the FAA on these certified aircraft, that if they suffer a propeller strike, you do a run out of the crankshaft as he's demonstrating here and replace the gear, the accessory drive gear on the back of the engine. And here's that accessory drive gear that's required to be replaced right here. So in order to get to that, on this particular airplane, you got to pull the whole engine off, take the accessory case off, and replace this drive gear. And remember, Jason is not yet an A&P mechanic, though I assume he's working under the auspices of an A&P mechanic. Actually, the absolute minimum required by the FAA is to inspect this dowel pin, but Jason does the right thing and replaces the entire gear. But that leaves in question the magnetos themselves. The magnetos have plastic drive gears in here, and it's unclear looking at this video series, and that's the problem investigators will have, is videos such as this they're edited, so you don't know exactly what all work was done. In the end, did they end up replacing all these magnetos, or did they just run with the existing magnetos? But you've got these plastic gears inside the magnetos, and one of the things investigators will be looking at on the crashed airplane was the condition of these magnetos, and they will take them off and bench run them and see if they operate correctly. But these plastic gears can be broken quite easily in the event of a prop strike. Another accessory that investigators will be looking at closely is the carburetors. In one of the videos, he mentions the left carburetor leaking and they were going to replace it. But in the end, did they end up replacing both carburetors? And one thing I couldn't find throughout all these videos, and again, it may very well be edited out, we don't know. What did they do to go through the entire fuel system on this aircraft? Did they really go through there and clean those fuel tanks and double, triple check the purging of those fuel tanks and make sure there was no sediment in those fuel tanks. And that may have been the cause of the entire accident. It may very well have not had nothing to do with the work that they've done on the aircraft, but what if he received a load of water on the fuel, on his last fuel load that he picked up before he took off on his last flight? Now, proper pre-flight procedure is that you need to sump those tanks and make sure there's no water in the tanks before you take off. But there's a lot here that investigators are going to be combing through. A lot of work that Jason did on this aircraft in a short amount of time just to get it annualed. And this aircraft, it wasn't rebuilt, it wasn't restored, it was annualed. It was given an extensive annual inspection, 2 rebuilt propellers, and a lot of work done on the engine. They swung the landing gear. I didn't see where they checked the rigging on the landing gear, something that on the 310 takes nearly 2 days worth of work to check the rigging on the landing gear, and you have to do that every year. But investigators will be looking through all these videos real closely to see if there's anything that corroborates anything that they find on the engines of the crashed aircraft. So Jason is getting a very hard lesson in the vicissitudes of general aviation, especially when working on these certified aircraft without your mechanics license, airframe and power plant mechanics license. I would suggest Jason and anybody else that's thinking about getting into this sort of line of YouTubery, put down the cameras, get your proper ratings, get your A&P license, get your pilot's license, get your multi-engine rating. Perhaps consider documenting that process carefully without incriminating yourself, and then go on to complete the rebuild or the restoration of the Cessna 401. Thank you so much for your support of this channel, especially the supporters over on Patreon that make this content possible, because as you can see, often the ad revenue from YouTube doesn't even pay for enough for your time that you put into the endeavor of creating these videos in the first place. So thank you so much, patrons, for making this channel possible. See you here.